Okay, happy Monday, everybody. Should be a good week. Hope everybody had a great Yom Rishon, a Yom Shabbos Kodesh. You had a good Shabbos. This is the weekly roundup. I know it's a different background. You're welcome. I'm actually in Roslyn, New York. I'm in New York. I'll be visiting 770, the Rebbe's shul. I will be at the Ohel, the Rebbe's resting place, which is a very holy place. Perhaps some would argue the grave of a tzaddik is called the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it's the Holy of Holies. We find many instances in the Torah, most famously, not in this week's Parsha, but in a few Chumashes from now, when that Yehoshua and Kalev, Joshua and Caleb, went to Eretz Yisrael, went to Israel to go scout out the land. Yeah, because the Jewish people were about to enter it. The first place they went to was the Mara Samachpela, in Hebron, the cave of our patriarchs. And they went there to pray. And I will tie that back in. What's so significant about that? And I'll tie that back in because it's connected to this week's Parsha to a certain extent. But first, I want to talk about the Rambam, the Maimonides of the week. We know that there's a daily cycle of Rambam. We read 3 chapters a day and we complete the whole entire Rambam, called the Yad Chazaka. You complete the entire Rambam every year in less than a year. In less than a year. And we are learning this week, we're holding by Terumas. Truma, which is tithings. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit something about Truma. What is Truma? You're supposed to give the choices of your produce to Hashem, to God. How do you do that? By giving it to the Kohen, the priest, the high priest. That's what happened when the Jews finally settled the land of Israel during the times of the first temple and the second temple. That's what we did. When the majority of the Jews lived in Israel, that's what we did. We still have that obligation. If you live in the land of Israel, you have an obligation to take a tenth of your produce and give it to the Kohen, to a priest. The problem is, what's the problem? You're not allowed to eat your produce. So let's say you have 100 tomatoes. You have to take 10, either the first 10 or the 10 most choicest of them, and give them to a priest. You can give it to whichever priest you want, maybe one in the neighborhood. I don't think there's any rule. And a high priest, a Kohen, he didn't have a job. His job was to be holy, and he's supported by everybody else, by the Levites, the Levium, and the Israelites, Yisraelim. So you can give it to him, and then he eats it. He eats it in his house, he gives it to his family, and the Truma is holy. You can't exchange it for anything. He can't say, I'll trade it in for a car or whatever else I need. And nobody else is allowed to eat it. It has a status of kedusha, of holiness. And you must be spiritually, the priest must be spiritually pure. Not only the priest, I think anybody, every single person that touches it. I'm going to pick it from my garden. So I'm going to touch it and I'm going to put it in a basket. I'm going to say, this is Truma, and then I give it to the priest. I have to be in a state of spiritual purity called Tahara. And I can't be in a place called Tuma, which is spiritual impurity. Now, it doesn't mean nothing negative. There's nothing negative about being spiritually impure. Tameh, which is spiritually impure, it's called impure, but you can become Tameh on purpose. In fact, we do many times. The most severe type of tuma, of impurity, is touching a dead body, coming into contact with a dead body, or coming into contact with something that a dead body came into contact with, like a coffin. Now, the greatest mitzvah you could possibly do is burying the dead. It's called mace mitzvah. It's the greatest mitzvah you can do because there is nothing, there's no reciprocity. The one that you're burying can't do anything for you in the physically. So you're doing it purely for the sake of that person. But nevertheless, it is a great mitzvah. In order to become pure from a dead body, you have to have the para aduma, a red heifer, the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer. Yeah, they burn this red cow. There's only been 9 in our history of the Jewish people that they burned. They don't burn it alive. I mean, it's shechted and it's done in a humane way, I guess you could say. But there's a whole process. Much like kosher, it makes no sense. These are spiritual things. We have no logic to it. In fact, King Solomon, who understood the secrets of every mitzvah, what is the benefit and the special quality of the mitzvah, he says everything makes sense to me except for the para aduma. I don't understand how this works, even in the spiritual world. I don't understand it. So anyway, in order to become pure, nevertheless, in order to become pure, you have to have the para aduma sprinkled on you. Then you go to the mikvah, and you're in business. What's the problem? Nowadays, we don't have a red heifer. We don't have we're all spiritually impure. We're all, and the most severe kind, the most severe level. So, and you're not allowed to eat to Truma, even a priest, a high priest is not allowed to go to a Kohen is not allowed to go to a cemetery. He's not allowed to participate in a cemetery unless it's his own family, not her. A daughter Kohen doesn't have that issue. Like what's called a bas Kohen. It's only on the male, but he's not allowed to go to a cemetery. The rabbis in our shul, 3 of them are Kohanim. They're unable to take part in any, God forbid, when somebody passes away, they're unable to take part in the actual service. Either I or somebody else will take over and run the service. So now, the Truma still is in existence in the land of Israel till today. You have to take 10% of your produce, if you're a farmer, and give it to a priest. You're not allowed to eat it. So what do? You can't give it to a priest because a priest, even though he's, I didn't complete what I wanted to say. A priest is not allowed to go to, a Kohen is not allowed to go to a cemetery because he's not allowed to put himself in a situation where he for sure will become tameh, impure. Even though he is impure because he's touched somebody who's touched a dead body. I mean, they've all shook my hand and we've danced together and swung them around my shoulders, whatever. They've become impure, spiritually impure. But you're not allowed to actively try to do certain things. You're not allowed to actively try to go to a cemetery. There's a special mitzvah in the Torah for a priest not to go to a cemetery. That's the answer. But he's spiritually impure. He's for sure has that issue of a mitzvah of being spiritually impure, and therefore he's not allowed to eat truma. But we have an obligation to give him truma. So what do you do nowadays? What do you do with the truma? You still have to take it. Much like challah. It's the same thing we do with challah. If you make challah bread, what is challah? Challah is taking a certain amount of the dough and saying, this is for Hashem. This is for God. You give a certain amount of your dough to God. And it has to be, you have to make a certain amount of challah. It's a lot of challah. That's my wife. She makes it probably every week. It's a lot of challah. And she takes a little bit. And what does she do with it? She puts it in the oven and she burns it up completely. Because we have no one to give it to. We don't have a priest to give it to or a Levite to give it to, so you burn it up completely. And in fact, I think I'm almost positive that's what they do today. They burn it, or they maybe they even leave it in the ground. Perhaps it becomes compost, but it's in effect today. And therefore, when you go to Israel, you have to look at the kashrus, the hechsher of the companies that are watching over the produce. See, here outside the land of Israel, which is where all of us live, we don't have to worry about the produce. Yeah, you got to open up. You can buy produce anywhere you want, and it's kosher. Some things you got to look inside to make sure there's no bugs, because we're not allowed to eat bugs. But nevertheless, you can buy produce from any store that you'd like. In Israel, it's not the case. In Israel, because there are so many laws connected with agriculture, you have to have kashrus companies. Companies that look over kosher sort of supervision, and you only buy from certain companies because they have to make sure that truma, that the tithing was taken from the produce. And in fact, you also have to see whether now we're in the Shemitah year, which we spoke about earlier. people in the land of Israel are not allowed to buy vegetables from the land of Israel for the most part, 99% of the time. You're not going to be able to, all the vegetables are imported, all the fruits and vegetables are imported. You want to make sure that you're buying vegetables and fruits in order for it to be kosher, has to be coming from outside the land of Israel. So that is it's called Terumah, which means a tithing. It's still in effect today. So if you're in the land of Israel, make sure you buy fruit from the proper place. Okay, now this week's Parsha is Parsha's Vayeira. And what happened last week? It ended off with Abraham giving himself a circumcision. Why did he give himself a circumcision? Because a circumcision must be done by someone who believes in the mitzvah, a Jewish person who believes in the mitzvah. Nowadays, unfortunately, we have instances, people just don't know, that they do a circumcision at the hospital for their baby, by the doctor, and that is not good enough. First of all, it's got to be at least by the 8th day, at least. It should be done on the 8th day. If it can't be done on the 8th day, which is common because babies are jaundiced, then you have to do it the next possible. You don't have to do the next possible moment, but when the 8th day comes and the baby is healthy, you have to do it on the 8th day. If you don't, then you can really pick whichever day you'd like to do it. You try to do it pretty soon after. So Abraham gave himself a bris, and he's sick. On the 3rd day, it says that the baby feels the most pain on the 3rd day. Now, nowadays, that's not true. We don't find that to be true anymore. And the rabbi over here, the mohel in our town, Rabbi Cohen, he thinks it's because they didn't have back then. They didn't have things to help with cuts. They didn't have like rubbing alcohol to make sure that nothing gets infected. Babies would always get infected. There would always be an infection when they have the bris, and you just wait it out. The baby would be fine. But the 3rd day was very painful. Nowadays, we don't really have that because we take care of it. But so it was the 3rd day. The Parsha opens up with Avram 3 days after his bris. And what happens? God is having a conversation with Avram outside of his tent. I don't know what they're schmoozing about. It doesn't get into the details, but he's schmoozing with him. And the lesson, here is the beginning. Here's one of the greatest mitzvahs that we have. It's called Bikur Cholim. Bikur means to visit. Cholim, those that are sick. Visiting those that are sick is one of the best mitzvahs you can possibly do. And it says just visiting. The mitzvah is actually to meet in person. It's not so much to send a text and to call on the phone, although that does go a long way. It's better than nothing. But the real mitzvah is to go visit in person. And it says you take away a certain percentage of their illness. Yeah, I think we see it. I mean, I see it. Yeah, people feel rejuvenated when you come to visit them. My father, who's in the medical field, when someone says, I don't want visitors, 9 times out of 10, he says, I don't believe them, and he visits them anyway, and they're always, 9 times out of 10, they're very appreciative. So if somebody feels, I know it takes a lot of courage, sometimes to visit somebody who's not in a good state, especially if you're not very close with them, even if you are very close with them, it's just such a, it's such a weight to go visit somebody. What do you say to somebody? We're talking about real sickness. Nevertheless, you should go and visit them. God will help you. And obviously you go there to listen, you go there to offer words of encouragement, genuine words of encouragement. Everything should be said with genuinely. And that's one of the greatest mitzvahs you can do. Now, one of the things you should do when you get there, not necessarily flowers. People like to bring flowers. I mean, you could. My mother was sick, she should live and be well. I remember I went to go visit her, and it was like a jungle in her room, so many flowers that she became nauseous from so many flowers. So you see, there's a lot of flowers. Don't bring so many flowers. But one of the things you should do is clean the house. It says when you clean the house or the room of the person that is sick, it brings back, I think, 1/60th of their health. Being in a clean room, and this is a lesson for not just when someone's sick, but all situations. You shouldn't live in clutter. You should. It's a lot of work to clean up, especially if you have a lot of kids or even one kid or whatever, doing it by yourself. But not living in clutter. You should constantly have a clean house to the best of your ability. And that's the Torah is saying that's one of the ways of assuring your ability to stay healthy. So we should stay, you should have a very clean house, and you should clean the house for other people. So Avram visits, God visits Avram, and it says he visited him in the plains of Mamre. And we'll see that often, the plains of Mamre. Who was Mamre? What is Mamre? So Mamre was a person. And the Torah is mentioning him. We'll mention him a few times. Why? Avram had 3 friends. He had Anar, Eshkol, and Mamre. There were 3 friends. And Avram, the Medrash tells us a story that Avram was given the mitzvah to give himself a circumcision, a bris milah, and he wasn't sure whether he should do it publicly or privately. Actually, the Medrash says that he wasn't sure if he should do it. And I think the Talmud explains that it means whether he should do it publicly or privately. Now, Avram wasn't sure because Avram was trying to bring people closer to monotheism. And he knew that if I publicize this mitzvah of, basically mutilating your body to a certain, you're cut into your body. And there's an infection and you're going to get sick. It's going to turn people away. They're not going to want to take part in such a, tradition. So 2 of his friends, Eshkol and Anar and Eshkol, said, you should do it privately. But Mamre says, no, you should do it publicly because you shouldn't be ashamed of a mitzvah. You're right, it will look different. You're right, you might even push people away. But nevertheless, it is a mitzvah from God, and you should do it anyway. So Avram, make a big party. You should make it public. You should make a party about it. Much like we do today. So he did, and God appreciated that and mentions Mamre. Mamre said, you should do the party on my compound. You do the party in my place. And so the Torah goes ahead and mentions that it was in the plains of Mamre. It was in the home, in the land of Mamre, to remind us that all mitzvahs should be done publicly. Something about a bris, I just want to mention. We actually don't invite people to a bris. You announce there's a bris, but you don't invite people to the bris, because it says that the Shechina, the presence of God, is there, comes to every bris, as well as Eliyahu Hanavi. Elijah the prophet comes to visit every bris. Elijah the prophet, in short, comes to visit every bris because during the times of Elijah, of Eliyahu, people were not giving themselves, people were in a very low spiritual state. Jewish people were not really interested in Judaism, and they started to not do a bris milah anymore. They weren't interested. And he went around fighting for people to continue to do a bris, even if the government had decrees not to give a bris. Some Jewish people started enacting the decree, to appease and, as we like to do very often, we will finally be accepted by the government now. We've made it to the highest place of society. And Eliyahu fought against it, and as a reward, or a consequence, but a reward of his actions, God said, you will visit every bris milah. You will be present by every bris milah, and you will greet the Shechina, the presence of God. You invite someone to a bris and they say, I can't go, I'm not going. It's like saying, I'm not interested in the Shechina and Elijah the prophet. So we have a tradition of not inviting people, but just announcing, so that they don't have the opportunity to say, I'm declining the invitation to meet God. Oh, if you can't go, you can't go. So we just announce it. Just a little bit of a heads up. Moving on. So what happens? God is having a conversation with Avram. And Avram was waiting outside of his tent. Why was he waiting outside of his tent? He said Avram had a tent in the middle of the desert with all of his servants and cattle. Very expensive operation. Imagine opening up a restaurant in the middle of the Sahara, or in Death Valley, whatever, in the middle of nowhere. They make a lot of money. In fact, they say, I was never there, but at Masada, which is that mountain you can climb, the story of Masada in Israel. You climb this mountain, and it's very hot. Usually it's very steep. You work very hard. And there's one orange juice stand or a juice stand at the very top, I think. The only one, and it's very expensive. It's like $10 for juice, 8 ounces. You would never pay such a price. But he's the only one in town, and it's very, it costs a lot to schlep all those materials in the middle of a mountain, in the middle of a desert. It's very expensive, so people pay it. It makes a good living. So Avram had, a compound in the middle of the desert with fine meats and cattle and servants and places to stay, many inns. So you can imagine it was very expensive. And what a relief. What did he do? Why did he have it there? Because he wanted people while they were traveling to stop in his tent, because he wanted to do the great mitzvah of achnasas orchim, welcoming orchim, guests. One of the greatest mitzvahs you can possibly do. And we're going to learn some mitzvahs about guests, how to treat guests from this week's Parsha. So he would invite them in and he would teach them about God. And that's why he had a lot of converts. And if they didn't want, he would ask them to bless God, who gave the food. If they didn't want to, he would say, okay, now you have to pay for your meal. And they would say, how much is the meal? And you can imagine the prices. He would give them fine tongue and hamburgers and steaks and whatever they wanted, cream and bread. Very expensive. And they would say, oh, I'd rather just say thanks to God. Now, it could be that they didn't say it was being genuine, but nevertheless, that's okay. In Judaism, we don't really do that so much today, but we learn a lesson from Avram, even getting them to say thank God. It has an effect upon the world. And one mitzvah, that's why you'll see Jewish kids, you'll see Chabad kids go in the middle of New York City and asking people to put on tefillin. Yeah, one of my favorite is Chabad in the Village in LA. Got Dave Portnoy, pizza review guy, doing a pizza review, and he stopped him. He said, Dave, put on tefillin. And Dave was like, how long will it take? He said, it'll take a minute. And Dave said, okay. It's a very famous picture. And even though Dave went to the next non-kosher restaurant and ate whatever he wanted to eat. But nevertheless, because why would we do such a thing? Because the power of one mitzvah awakens some sort of spark inside. The power of one mitzvah makes you into a new person. And so we take it, whether you have the right mindset or not the right mindset, and obviously it's better to have the right mindset and try to become more of a proper vessel to receive whatever you're going to receive. But nevertheless, you do the act, and there's something, it creates a revelation of godliness, even though we might not see it. It creates an effect upon the world for goodness and for godliness. And nevertheless, we try to do it anyway. So Avram would try to get them to praise God, even if they didn't mean it, because it still had the proper effect and it still affected the person, whether it affected the person at that moment or affect that person in 40 years. Nevertheless, it starts a chain. It puts them on a new track. So Avram was waiting outside of his tent, and it was a very, very hot day. It says God made it very hot because he didn't want guests to come to travel, because otherwise it would burden Avram. It would burden Abraham, because he would get guests and he's in a lot of pain. And he would have to get everything together and teach them and sit down. So God said, I'll visit you. But Abraham would have nothing of it. And so he stood outside of his tent looking for guests, trying to get people to come in. So God said, okay. So God sent 3 angels dressed as men, and they came in, and they had 3 jobs. Each angel only lives for one job, and that's the end of it. He does his mission, and then he dissipates, or it dissipates. One of the angels came to tell Sarah and Abraham, you're going to have a child. Now, she had no womb. They just changed their names. And God said, with your new name, you become a new person, like we learned Thursday night in the Talmud class. But nevertheless, Sarah had no womb. She had it, and she was 90 years old. She hadn't menstruated. The Torah says she hasn't, who knows how long. And that day she actually menstruated. She had no womb, and she obviously had a womb that came in. One said, I'm here to save Lot, and the other one is to destroy Sodom and Amorah. They're going to destroy Sodom and Amorah, which we will get really into at the end of the Parsha and next week's Parsha. And we'll talk a little bit about what was so bad about Sodom and Amorah. So they came, they visited him, and he was very happy. And he greets them, he brings them in, he talks to them, and it became kind of clear that became clear to Avram that they were angels, and Avram was used to seeing angels all the time, so he wasn't alarmed. And when one of the angels, the one angel who was there to tell everybody that Sarah was going to have a baby, it says that she laughed on the inside, and she said to herself, "Can this skin?" She said, "Can this skin turn smooth?" She's a way of saying she was very old. Will this skin turn smooth? And how could someone conceive when skin is not this smooth and a husband is so old? And that's what she said to herself. She was cynical. It was of cynicism. She didn't verbalize it, but she said it. She said it in her mind. She laughed. It said she laughed, and you think this old lady and this old man are going to have a child? Now, Avram, interestingly enough, God tells Abraham, why is Sarah laughing? Why is she acting cynical? She said, how could someone like me who is so old have a child? That's not what she said, though. She said, how can someone as old as my husband not have a child? But when God said it to Abraham, she said, why did she say about herself, someone so old like myself, how can I have a child? And here the Talmud learns out, for the sake of peace, sometimes a little bit of a white lie is proper. Now, the Talmud gets into a lot of discussion about how far you can take that, but for the sake of peace, a little bit, a white lie is okay, has its place. Now, we know everything in the world has a time and a place. Everything, even something which seems very evil and negative, has its time and its place, and you have to know when to use it, when not to use it. Sometimes we make a mistake, we use it in the wrong place, or we use it too much. But here we see the concept of a lie having its place. So, nevertheless, it says then she menstruated. She menstruated because she had a womb, and now she was about to have a baby. One of the angels tells Abraham that I'm going down to Sodom and I'm going to destroy it. And the other one said, I'm going to save your brother, your uncle, your nephew, Lot. And it says over here, God says, Aradna na, I will descend and see how the people are acting. And there's a bit of it's a bit of a Kabbalistic concept. I mean, God is able to see anything. What do you mean? I will descend and see. God knows. He knew what was going. He knew what Sarah was saying in her own mind. God doesn't need to descend and see. But here we have this concept of chesed, kindness. That kindness, there's a difference between chesed and gevura. That kindness is coming out. It's an attribute of giving, of coming out, whether a person is deserving or not. Chesed is I give, whether you deserve it or not. And that was Avram. Avram gave no matter who you were. Gevura, which we saw by Yitzchak, by his son, is also a form of kindness, but of a muted kindness. Yeah, as the example that I always give. Yitzchak, yeah, you have a child who's playing with a knife. Now, perhaps Avram would say, oh, the child really wants to play with a knife. Let him play with a knife. That makes him happy. But Yitzchak would say, no, this is not a kindness to the child. The child could harm himself. I'm going to take it away from him, and the child is going to scream because the child doesn't understand that it's dangerous. But nevertheless, you know that it's better for the child. That's the idea of Gevura. We actually we try to always ask for God to give us kindness, to be Chasdei Hashem, to always give. Much more often, kindness should prevail than Gevura. We also see that Avram had Gevura, Yitzchak had Gevura because he's not mentioned very much in the Torah. You'll see next week when Yitzchak only has like one Parsha dedicated to himself because he lived in the land of Israel and he lived a very secluded life and he lived a very private life. And so we see that concept of him not being very Gevura, a lot of Gevura held back. As opposed to Yaakov, the third child, we'll see is the blending of the two and gets into a lot of trouble and a lot of issues. But he gets involved in the world. So this is the concept of God was trying to do some kindness. So Al Rabna na, I will descend and look. And in other words, I will put in effort. I promise you, I'm not interested in destroying a city. Not like I did by Noah. I'm not interested in doing that. This is my creation. This is my garden. God calls this world his garden. Basi Lagani. I've come to my garden, and everything's beautiful, and everything has its time and its place. But there's certain weeds that I have to take out. There's certain things that are suffocating other areas. Yeah, the roots are starting to strangle other roots, and sometimes I have to take them out. I have to not even replant them, but I have to. It's toxic. But he said, I will go there. I promise you, before I go and wreak havoc, or take care of a situation, I'm doing everything with kindness. I'm trying to find any part of kindness that I can possibly, any reason to keep it going before I take it away. Now it says in Pirkei Avos that there are 4 types of people. There are 4 types of people. One type of person will say, what's mine is mine, and what's mine is yours. Yeah, everything I own is belongs to me, but you can also take part in it. You can come, come si, come sa, mi casa, su casa. You can come here, you make yourself comfortable. My stuff, I use it, you can use it, all good. Another type of person that says what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine. It's a very selfish person. Obviously, it's a terrible type of I can do whatever I want, whatever. Obviously, it's a bad thing. Then there's another type of person that's what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. And then another type of person, what is mine and what is yours is yours. And the Torah says, the Mishnah in Avos, in Pirkei Avos says, that is the attribute of Sodom and Gomorrah. They have this mindset of what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. What does that mean? That doesn't seem like such a bad thing. It makes a lot of sense. But it was their way of life. They said, what's mine is mine. I'm a self-made person. And you're your own self-made person. And therefore, because I'm a self-made person, I attribute everything to myself. It's all about me. And we also see it played out in the way the Medrash goes into detail about what their cities were like. You were not allowed to have guests in your house. You would be killed if you did any sort of kindness. If you allowed a poor person, because what did it do? If you allowed people to come and stay in your home, it was a way of saying, you're unfortunate, you're less fortunate than me. Come, I'll invite you and I will help you. What they were afraid was that many poor people or less fortunate people would start coming into their homes, and start living in their cities. And they didn't want that. So they said, there's a rule, you're not allowed to help the poor. It was a very wealthy, extremely wealthy place. And they didn't want, less desirable people, so to speak, come to their home. And that helps us understand the word for charity. The word for charity is actually not the correct translation of tzedakah. Tzedakah means, usually translated as charity, but it really means righteousness. It means doing the proper, what is right. Giving to another person who is less fortunate is not a good idea. And it's not charity. It's called righteousness. You're doing the right thing. That is the most right thing you can possibly do. And they made a law that you were not allowed to do such a thing. Because they said, this is mine. You do whatever, you stay away. You don't come into my area, my thing. Mine is mine. By saying what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours, it's saying, I'm not a self-made person. God gave me everything, but God didn't give it to me for me. God entrusted this item for me to elevate. Much like we say in Chassidus very often, we say about children. Somebody has an issue of getting very upset with their child. It's very difficult not to sometimes, of getting angry with the child. I think somebody had an issue of they kept smacking their child. They would hit their child. They felt very bad. They were like, I hit my child when he gets me so riled up. And the Rebbe said, you're looking at it all wrong because the child doesn't belong to you. The child is on loan to you. Your job is like as a facilitator. Your job is to raise that. I've given you this gift, and your job is to raise this child in the proper path. But you don't. It doesn't belong to you. You're responsible for the child. It's an item I have placed in your possession, a very precious, in fact, probably the most precious item in this creation. I've entrusted to you I've entrusted to you, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me, says God. Everything in this world belongs to me. It doesn't belong to you. I've given you everything, and I can take everything away. And that person recognizes, and with that, when you say it's not my own child, I wouldn't hit my neighbor's kid. That's a different game. But with that kind of mindset, you have a special appreciation for everything. You'll protect everything. You understand this doesn't belong to me and it belongs to everybody else. I just have possession of it. I'm responsible for taking care of it at this moment. Or if it's food, for example, I'm responsible for elevating it. Or clothing, I have an ability to elevate it at this moment, but it can be taken away and given to somebody else. The attribute of Sodom was, what's mine is mine. I'm a self-made person. It's all about me. And I don't want you mixing into my bit. Don't tell me you've helped me or anything like that. I'm not giving you anything of mine because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me. Why should I give you anything? That was the problem with Sodom, and that's the improper part of it's a bad mindset of life. When it says that Avram, when the guests went to leave, it says that he was malava them. He escorted them out of their house, escorted them out of the tent as they went on their way. And here we have a special mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah. I think it's not even a loch. I think it's just a good idea, one that's often used, is that when guests leave your home, you should walk them out the door. Now, the point originally was to show them where to go. But even if you have guests over your home, they're going to their car, you should walk them out of the house. And actually, I think it actually is halacha, I believe. And it says you should walk at least, 4 amas, or like 2 feet or something, outside of your house. And so it's Shabbos at night. Obviously, if you can't get up, you can't get up. But under normal circumstances, you should walk the guests out. I think it even says you should open the door for them and walk out first. I'm sorry, you should be the one waiting for them outside. It's called being malava because that's what Avram did. Sodom was getting destroyed, and Avram called out to God before it was going to be destroyed, and he said, "God, is it impossible? Do you mean to say there are not at least 100 righteous people there that the place should be saved?" And God said, "I'll go look." And he said, "No, not even 100." And then Avram said, 50. Are there not at least 50? And he said, "No, there are not 50. Are there at least 10, 25, 10, 5, not even 1? And God said, "Not even 1. And then with that, Avram turned around and went back to his place. Here we see the big difference between Avram and Noach. That you never find the Torah recording that Noach said, he never tried to defend the people of the world. He never protested God and said, "Is there really nobody else righteous besides me? That therefore you shouldn't destroy the world." But as of what we see by Avram, that he did protested and he kept going, and he didn't just say 105. He sat there for a long time waiting for God, and God appreciated that. God liked that. We see that you have to intercede and you have to call out on behalf of another. It says about your own issues. With your own issues, you don't say, "God, why? Why are you doing this to me?" But it says when God is putting somebody else in a bad situation, very often you'll say, "God," it's proper to say, "God, why would you do that to that person?" Because about ourselves, you can look inside, you can see maybe you have some sort of spiritual deficiency, you made mistakes, but you can't judge another person. And God wants you to defend another person. If somebody else is sick, say, "God, why are you doing it to that person? That person has a family or this or that." Very proper to pray on behalf of another, and it's to a certain extent, it's almost improper to pray on your own behalf. You should pray on your own behalf as well, but the Gemara talks about it. You for sure should pray on the behalf of somebody else. And it says Avram went back to his makom. He turned around and went back to his place. Why back to his place? And it says that Avram prayed. He went back to his place and he prayed. And here we have a concept of something called a makom kivua. You ever go to a shul? The joke goes, a new yeshiva student came to yeshiva, and he sat down in a chair. And he said, another yeshiva student came and said, hey, I sit there. So he got up and he went to another chair. And then another student came and said, oh, I sit, get out of my chair. I sit there. It's my makom kavua. I sit there. So then he went up to a few different places. And then he finally saw, what happened. They said, one bacher said, don't sit there because the guy who sits there is going to be upset that you sat there. So he goes to another place. And the guy says, don't sit there. He'll be upset that you sat there. There's another place. No, that student will be upset that you sat there. And finally, he sits in another place. And they said, you shouldn't sit there. And he said, why shouldn't I sit here? He said, that's the head of the yeshiva. And he'll go and find another place to sit. Meaning everyone else is very, this is where I sit. But the guy who runs the place would be like, yeah, if you want to sit there, you can sit there. I'll find another place to sit. Yeah. It's a yeshiva joke. It's called a makom kivua. And in fact, it's very important to pray. A makom kavua means your permanent place. It says that you should always have a place. The place where you study is the place that you should pray. You should always have a place, the same place that you pray in your house. Yeah, if you have a place in the house that you pray, you should always go back to that place. Because there's a certain kedusha, a certain holiness that is built in that place. You're used to talking to God there. And the place itself becomes holy. The walls, the chair of that area becomes holy, and you find it to be easier to connect to God in such a place. It's called the makom kivua. It's very important to have a place that you pray very often. So what else goes on? Then we have the story of the famous story. Sodom and Amorah are being destroyed, and the angel comes to save Lot and his family. And the angel says, you got to leave right now because we're about to destroy this place. Don't take anything. You run out and don't look back. If you look back, there'll be consequences. Why shouldn't they look back while they're running away? Because really they're evil as well. And they should be destroyed. But because of the merit of being close to Avram, to Abraham, and God had such a love for Abraham, he decided to save Lot's family. But really, they shouldn't be destroyed. They should be destroyed. So that God said, I don't want you looking back because I don't want you to see the destruction of people that you really should have been destroyed with. It's like embarrassing for them, so to speak. It's taunting, it's haughty. So they're running. Lot's wife turns around, and it's right near, Sodom and Gomorrah is right near the Dead Sea. She's running, and she turns around, and she becomes a pillar of salt. She became a pillar of salt. There's different explanations why, but one was she wouldn't even give salt to guests. She hated having guests over so much. She wouldn't, if they asked for salt, she wouldn't even give them salt. Now, salt also is not something used to enhance food. That's one thing to make your life more tasty, but it's also for health. Yeah, you need a certain level of sodium in your body. So she didn't care about their pleasure and she didn't care about their life, and she became a pillar of salt. If you take a tour in the Dead Sea, some say that's Lot's wife. It's like it's very salty, obviously, and there's salt mounds. And I don't know if it's true or not. I doubt it's true, but they might be right. What do I know? So she turned around and became a pillar of salt. Lot and his daughters, now they thought everything was being destroyed. They thought it was like Noah, the time of Noah again. Everything was being destroyed. So they ran into the hills, and they had some alcohol with them. And I guess they did take some possessions. Or the possessions were there, and they said, we have to procreate. The daughter said, we're the last 3 people in the world, let's procreate. So they said, let's sleep with our father, let's get him very drunk so we'll have no idea what's going on, and we'll sleep with him. And the Talmud says that really Lot did know what was going on, but he didn't care. He wasn't a good guy, and so you want to have an incestuous relationship, all good by me. They got him really drunk. And back then, women would get pregnant, and they would get pregnant right away at that moment, and they would show, and they would have a baby. So the first daughter had, and it was called Moab. Moab means from my father, and the nation of Moab comes from her. And Ammon, which there is a nation of Ammon. Now, who comes from this? I've said it many times. Interestingly enough, who comes from this relationship, this incestuous relationship with Moab? Who will eventually come? Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, and she became close with Naomi, and she converted. She was a righteous convert, and ultimately she would give birth to. She would have a great grandchild. She would have Peretz and Yishai, and eventually she would have King David. King David from King Solomon to King Solomon, and then from King Solomon, who was also married to a Moabite convert, Naomi, Mashiach. Mashiach's lineage is from an incestuous relationship. I've said it many times. Why? This is a concept in Kabbalah. Sometimes why does Mashiach come from such a disgusting situation? And God sometimes has to, in order for something so great to come into the world, he has to cover it over. Klipa. Yeah, klipa. He's got to cover it over. And klipa is something negative. He has to cover it over in something negative, because if something is so great, then evil, everything will try to be attracted to it and try to use it out in a bad way, in a bad force. Like Esau. Esau was not a bad guy until the age of 36 or so. Yeah, Yitzchak's children, Yaakov and Esau. Esau was very good. Esau was incredible, even more spiritually powerful than Yaakov. And that's why Yitzchak showed so much attention to Esau. But because he attracted so much, so to speak, the ayin hara, if you want to say, maybe perhaps. People, it gets to your head. He wasn't ready yet for everyone to be revealed about who he really was, and eventually took him off the proper path, and he became very self-interested and selfish and destructive, self-destructive. He became destructive. So God didn't want that to happen with Mashiach, so he put it in a incestuous relationship, so to speak, through an incestuous relationship where everyone would stay away. I mean, it's disgusting. But that allowed that Mashiach spiritual energy to grow, and which would take many generations. Again, this is a spiritual concept. And eventually King David would come from there, and King Solomon, and ultimately Mashiach comes from this relationship. The tribe of Yehuda, there's a good chance that most of us come from this relationship as well, because King David and King Solomon had many wives and many children, and most of us probably come from them anyway, unless you're a Kohen. And even then, you through your mother's side, you probably have some sort of lineage. So this concept of great lights, great energies coming clothed in something negative, so that they would be nobody would get attention, they wouldn't draw so much attention. So then we have the birth of Yitzchak at the very end, and there was a circumcision. It says Avram made a great feast, a mishteh, he made a great feast, which we know here that there should be a party with regards to a circumcision. What's happening? You're entering into the covenant of Abraham, the covenant with God, covenant which promised us that there will be a redemption. We'll have the land of Israel, peace upon the world. We'll have a Torah where we're able to grasp God intellectually, through everything we do, emotionally. So it's a great joy, it's a great simcha. And the idea, it says that when Mashiach comes, God says, I will circumcise your heart. Not only will you be circumcised in the flesh, and now a woman is, as we explained before, a woman doesn't have this mitzvah because she doesn't need it. What is circumcision? Circumcision is this, there is a part that desensitizes the most holy organ. It leaves it's like this desensitizing material. And so when you remove it, there's a certain, sensitivity, I guess, but really we're in a spiritual sense, there's a spiritual sensitivity that takes place. Women have that naturally. Women have a natural spiritual sensitivity to godliness, anything spiritual. And men have to work much harder. That's why we have many more mitzvahs. We have many more things to work. We have to work harder in order to feel that spiritual sensitivity. It says when Mashiach comes, about all the Jewish people, I think Jews and non-Jews, everybody, I will circumcise your hearts. Not only will it be something physical, but it'll be you'll feel it spiritually, so to speak. Your heart, meaning your heart means your emotions. You'll be open at all times. You will remove that part which obviously desensitizes you to something spiritual. Everyone will feel it, and that is the ultimate circumcision. That is the circumcision that we're all waiting for. May it happen speedily in our days. Amen. Yesterday was, I wanted to mention one more thing. It says that yesterday was the yard side of Rachel Imeinu, Rachel, our mother. And today's Tanya, the daily Tanya, talks about the passing of Reb Mendel of Horodok. He was a disciple of the Maggid, of the Baal Shem Tov. And it says that a tzaddik is found more in the world after they pass than while they're in this world. Why? Because while their soul is in this world, their soul is in their body. And the body is limited. The soul can only do so much while it's in a body. It can't be in many places at once. It can't. It's selfish, because it feels its own existence. But when the soul leaves the body, it leaves the constraints of the body, and it can intercede on your behalf. It's found everywhere. It's much like electricity. When the power goes out, what happens to electricity? Electricity doesn't disappear. It goes everywhere. It goes back into. It's everywhere in the world. It's everywhere at all times. We create this box, like a refrigerator that could harness some of that energy, keeps it in a box, and it's not able to get out, but it's through its trying to get out and bouncing around in its energy, it can power other things. Same thing, the soul empowers the body while it's trapped, but once it's free, it's free, and it still has a special connection to those that were connected with it, says the Torah, and so that's why a tzaddik, a righteous person, is found more in this world. He's more present in this world than he was while he was in a body, or she was in a body, because now it's unlimited. It can go wherever it wants. It can intercede on behalf of wherever you are. That's why I'm going to the Ohel. I'm going to the grave of the Rebbe, and I'll ask prayers for everybody. That's why Rachel Imeinu is buried where she's buried, so that those can come. The body, actually, the soul has a special connection to the body even after it passes. Spoken about it many times. The nefesh, the level of the nefesh, remains close to the body. That's why it's important to go to a gravesite and you can talk to the person. Really, that there's a part of the nefesh, the part of the soul that's still there. It hovers over and it communicates with the other four parts of the soul. So with that, schus that Rachel Imeinu should help us get out of this gullus, and we should be reunited with her and everybody and all of our ancestors. As we know, when Mashiach comes, the souls will return to the bodies. And we hopefully will have that soon, today, in Yerushalayim, with everybody else. Amen. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Okay, so tonight will be Chasidic Nigunim. All right, everybody, enjoy the day.